Hi everyone, Amy here with Amy's Wares, and today I have another idea to use up that pattern paper and make a couple of thank you cards. So to start, I'm going to show you the products that I'm going to use. I have this thanks die from Picket Fence Studios. I have some old hand-me-down pattern paper, and I have a couple gorgeous 3D embossing folders from Altenew. Now here are a couple photos of the finished cards. They really do come together super quickly, and I was excited to have another opportunity or idea to use up some of this pattern paper that I have lying around. So here's the second card here. I love the embossing combined with the pattern paper. I feel it ties together perfectly and came together so quick. So to start, I have two panels of 110-pound cardstock. They were A2 size, but I cut them down with those stitched edge rectangle dies from Paper Rose. You can see it's just smaller than A2 size. And you want to do the die cutting prior to the embossing because you don't want to crush your embossing down by running it through for a die cut. Now I am spritzing them with some water. This is an optional step, but I do feel that it helps the paper really form the shape of the 3D embossing, especially when it's one like this where it's just such defined and deep ridges that these embossing folders will put into the paper. So I'm just lining them up where I want them on the pattern, just kind of looking through the front of the embossing folder to make sure it's showing the part of the embossing that I want it to. And look at this dimension. I never get sick of these guys. You know, I'm always playing with my embossing folders. I actually counted, I think I have about 20 different embossing folders from Altenew at this point. I can't get enough. Now here is an awesome little watercolor set. I recently got this from, excuse me, from a company called iulie on Etsy. These 6 little mini pans came together in this little tin, and then I purchased the half pan of the charcoal black on top of it as well, just so I could fit it in and have a nice variety for splatter. Now I'm using a water brush pen here from Arteza. I put a couple drops of water in it and gave it a minute just to kind of get the watercolor moistened up, and then I just put a little dabble of it on this acrylic block, and I'm using the water brush pen just to flick it right off the edge of the acrylic block and put splatter all over these 2 embossed panels. Now this is a bit of a copper color. It's kind of gold but has a little bit of an orange tint to it. So I felt like it would go with both of the pattern papers that I chose on these cards. So I'm just getting a nice little smattering on there. You can absolutely do this with a regular brush, like a watercolor brush that you have in your stash. I just always have these water brush pens handy, and then I have the additional benefit of being able to drop a couple drops of water right onto the watercolor to get it going. So once that's done, I'm going to set those aside, and then I pick a couple pieces of pattern paper from that set, and I'm just going to open this die. I haven't used it yet, but I will link the available products in the video description box below. If you expand the description box and scroll down, you'll find those details. So I'm just pulling this from its packaging and then lining it up where I think it'll look good on the pattern paper, and hold it down with some low-tack mint tape that I get from scrapbook.com. This is my favorite mint tape to use, but you can use washi tape or post-it paper, whatever you have to hold it down that won't tear your pattern paper. And then this is how I'm going to adhere the pattern paper. It's called Artist Tack. It's little mini micro dots. You basically pull back the front sheet, and then there's a ton of little mini micro dots of adhesive that will adhere to the back of your die cut. So I'm just going to lie those both down, put the top sheet back over it, and then burnish it with my hand. I also like to flip it over and use my bone folder here. This is an optional step. But basically it just puts a ton of adhesive on the back, and I prefer this with these little delicate dies just because I don't want liquid glue oozing out the side. That's not my favorite. But absolutely use whatever you have, whether you want to die cut it into some two-way adhesive or use liquid glue or a tape runner, whatever you want to use. But I find this works really well, and it does adhere even over the ridges of the embossing. So I'm just going to line this up. I have this one vertical orientation, and I'm kind of kicking the thanks sentiment off to the side and just lining this up using the grid on my glass mat just to make sure it's nice and straight. And then I'll just trim off the excess off the sides. Now this die is 5.5 inches long, so it would work whether you have an A2 size turned vertically or horizontally. You would just kind of trim off the excess if you go with the smaller pan, or the shorter side rather, like I'm doing here. So once I get it in place, I'm just going to make sure that S is not wonky, and then press it down right onto this panel, and then it's stuck nice and good and ready to go. So I'm just going to carefully snip off the excess and hopefully not mar up my panel, which I've been known to do from time to time. And then I'll do the same thing on the other panel. Just going to line this up. This one I'm going horizontal orientation, figuring out where I want to do it, if I want it in the center or more off to the side. And again, in typical fashion, I decide to go a little bit more off to the right, just because that tends to be the composition that I tend to prefer. So this one I'm going up a little bit higher, kind of like rule of thirds at this point, and then pressing that down, and then again just trimming off the little bit of excess on the side of the panel here. So it sticks really well. I love having these micro dots in my stash. I have done previous videos where I show that they work on all sorts of different surfaces with different varying dimension and things like that. So so far so good. I've had them for I think over a month now at this point, and they're working really well. Now on the one card with the horizontal sentiment, I have the perfect space, I feel, for one of these little sentiment strips. These are from LDRS Creative. This is a small business in Michigan that I kind of recently started ordering from, but they sell all these cool sentiment strips. They come together in one stamp, and then you buy a die that works with all these different stamps, and it cuts them all out. So it works great for my batching mentality. Then I'm just kind of flipping through, finding, you know, what sort of sub-sentiment I want to use and utilize that perfect strip that runs underneath the thanks. So obviously it looks great leaving it as is, but it's also the perfect space for a sub-sentiment if you want to add one of those. So I decided to use that one. And I have these little thin foam strips that I get from Amazon. I'll link those as well below. But basically they work perfectly behind strips of sentiments like this, and they just give it just a little bit of dimension. But everything else is kind of flush and flat to the card, other than obviously the dimension from the 3D embossing. But this says, "Thanks, you're so thoughtful." And I thought that was such a nice compliment to the design. So that's going to finish both these cards. You can see that gorgeous shimmer from the splattering on those new watercolors. It's kind of hard to see on the screen, but it's really impactful in person. It just adds kind of a nice shimmery surprise to your card. So I hope this gives you some ideas to use up that pattern paper that you've probably been hoarding like I do. And I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please hit the thumbs up, and I appreciate you watching. See you next time. Bye.